different resolutions relating to the occupied Palestinian territory has been ignored. Many of those trapped in Gaza today are refugees and their descendants. Repeated hostilities, occupation, the suffocating effects of the illegal boycott in place since 2007, and of the access-restricted areas imposed by Israel have made life in Gaza virtually unsustainable. The severe effects of the occupation in Gaza and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, on human rights, including the right to self-determination, must be addressed. The humanitarian situation in Gaza is at breaking point. Thousands of homes have been destroyed and hundreds of thousands of Palestinians have been displaced. People need water, food, shelter, electricity, and above all, safety. However, hospitals and ambulances, schools, including even United Nations premises, have not been protected in this conflict. Hospitals and personnel engaged in searching for, transporting, and caring for wounded and sick civilians must be safeguarded. The very specific protected status of these locations must be respected at all times. In addition, civilian objects such as homes and schools are prima facie not legitimate targets, and all necessary precautions should be taken to protect civilian lives. It is a terrible failure for humanity not to act to avert yet another devastating crisis in Gaza, one that has now superseded in casualties and duration the Israeli military operations of 2008-2009. The need for investigation and accountability raised then and after the 2012 military operation have not been met. A lasting solution to this protracted conflict must be found. The Commission of Inquiry established by the Human Rights Council last month will help to establish clarity regarding acts committed by all parties, thus beginning to address accountability issues related to the current hostilities in Gaza as well as to the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. Its conclusions and recommendations, which will be presented in March 2015, should be carefully considered and followed with appropriate action. The 2009 fact-finding mission on Gaza noted the need for the International Criminal Court to address the situation. Such a recommendation is still relevant today. The ICC's role is to end impunity and render justice in cases where national authorities have been unable or unwilling to do so. In conclusion, Mr. President, over the years there have been constant efforts to evade the binding nature of international human rights law and international humanitarian law in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory. But there can be no exceptions to these legal norms. They ensure that our societies maintain respect for common values and human dignity, indeed human life. There can be no true security without justice and respect for human rights. Adherence to international humanitarian law and international human rights law and ensuring accountability for violations are essential prerequisites for any lasting peace. For the sake of both Palestinians and Israelis, the parties to the conflict, the Security Council, the General Assembly, and individual states must act to bring this dreadful conflict to an end. The Secretary General has strongly called for talks to lay the groundwork for a durable ceasefire and for comprehensive negotiations on the underlying issues, including an end to the illegal blockade of Gaza and to almost 5 decades of occupation. This is indeed the only hope for peace. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the United Nations.
Nave Pillay, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, the top human rights official in the world there, describing the fighting in Gaza as a terrible failure for humanity. She went through some detail there of the human rights violations that she says have taken place. And of course this followed a speech from her boss a little earlier, Ban Ki-moon, who described Israeli actions in Gaza as outrageous, unacceptable and unjustifiable. And I think interesting that Nave Pillay there, Divya, referred all the way back to 1967 to Resolution 242, which said that Israeli forces, after the war then, should have pulled back from the West Bank and Gaza, and said that Israel, over the years, had broken many subsequent UN Security Council resolutions.
And well, James, while these talks are going on at the UN General Assembly and 193 countries are being briefed on what is happening in Gaza itself, over in Cairo there are other negotiations taking place. Can you bring us up to speed on that?
Yes, because earlier on, one of these UN officials, and we're hearing every part of the situation in Gaza from every UN official with a specific hat. In fact, they're briefing further now on the humanitarian situation. But earlier on, we heard from Robert Serry, actually speaking from Cairo. He is the UN official in charge of the Middle East peace process. He's there at those talks. Now, he gave us a little glimpse, I think, of what's going on. Not much detail, but he told us in the UN's view, part of the solution is this new consensus government and the idea that perhaps the Palestinian Authority can take a role on the borders of Gaza, and if they were to take a role, he's told me in the past, that perhaps gives confidence to both sides, particularly to the Israelis, which don't want to deal directly with Hamas.
That's James Bays live for us in West Jerusalem. He's been monitoring the talks at the UN General Assembly and also the talks in Cairo between negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinians, indirect negotiations, I must add. We'll, of course, be following both these very carefully and updating you on all the latest that comes out of them. But here's a reminder, you can keep up to date with all our news on our website. We'll have